Now let's consider phylogenetic tree representation in a little bit more detail. We'll be using phylogenetic tree representation throughout the entire quarter as we talk about different groups of organisms. So I highly recommend if phylogenetic tree representations are unfamiliar to you, that you spend some time going through BioSkills 7 in Appendix B at the back of your textbook. There's a very nice introduction to phylogenetic tree representation. I'll spend a little time going through some of the main points right now. So what's in front of you right now is in fact one of the figures from the BioSkills 7, and so here's an example of a tree right here. It's a fairly complicated tree in that there are 6 different taxa shown on this tree. So let's walk through some of these parts. As mentioned before, taxa are shown as the tips of this so-called tree. The tree is lying sideways in this particular representation. It doesn't have to. You'll also see trees that are more upright with the taxa actually aligned on the top instead of on the side. They are, either one of these is just fine. Those are just differences in orientation. It can be more convenient to place a tree sideways like this just because then there's more room to write out the names of the taxa. So the taxa are shown on the tips of these different trees, and then of this tree. And then as we go to the left here, we're actually going back farther in time. Notice down here at the bottom of this figure, there is a double-headed arrow here that shows more ancestral and more derived. It might be less confusing to you to think about this also as indicating the progression of time. So in this particular case, we're looking at taxa that are all exist at the same point in time, and their relationships are shown by this phylogenetic tree, which we can understand if we walk back, if we go back earlier in time. So as we go back earlier in time, then we're going to the left on this particular diagram. Now, within these branches, so way back here, we have a root, and this root would signify the common ancestor for all of the different taxa that were later derived from this common lineage. And anytime there is a branch shown here, the intersection point is referred to as a node, as shown here. And then this particular node has 2 branches. You see there's the name, there's 2 branches. This one is dichotomous, meaning it branches into 2. This one also branches into 2. You don't always have a branch into 2. So for example, this one branches into 3, so this could be referred to as a trichotomy, or more generally a polytomy, poly just meaning simply more than 2. So how one would interpret this is that at this point in time, remember time is moving from left to right, at this point in time then there was a split in the 2 lineages, which then underwent possible changes over time and possible more splitting of lineages. In this top one, we don't see any further splitting in this particular taxon. In this branch, we do see a later splitting into 2 branches, and then at this point in time, we see further branching into more lineages. Lineages that are more closely related to each other than they are to any other taxa are referred to as sister taxa. So in this particular group, taxon 2 and 3 are sister taxa. And notice that they have a more recent common ancestor with each other than either one of those taxa do with any of the other taxa in this particular diagram. How can we say that? Well, what's the most recent common ancestor for taxa 2 and 3? Well, if we go back in time, that would be this point D right here, prior to the splitting of the lineages that end up resulting in taxon 2 and taxon 3. So D represents the most common, the most recent common ancestor of 2 and 3. Points B and A also represent common ancestors for taxon 2 and 3, but they're not the most recent ones. They go further back in time, and they also include more descendant lineages. thinking about it the other way. So that was looking at a tree and then inferring past events and also going through some of the nomenclature used to describe trees. But a tree can also be generated from information about a taxa. So let's think about now going in the reverse direction, which is considering three taxa. Taxa A, B, and C will be their names. And we're going to use as a characteristic for identifying their relatedness a short sequence of ribosomal RNA and just simply 8 ribonucleotides. So here are the 8 right here. So for taxa A, it's this sequence. For taxa B, at the same location of the ribosomal RNA, it's this sequence. And for taxon C, it's this sequence. For these taxa, let's assume we can draw a phylogenetic tree shown here. So it's more simple than the ones we were just looking at because there's only 3 branches. So we would put A, B, and C on here in some order. And I want you to consider which taxon, would it be A, B, or C, would be this branch indicated by the red star right there. And so I encourage you now to pause the video and consider that and see if you can figure it out. Welcome back. Hopefully you paused it and took some time to figure out which taxon would be at this point in the phylogenetic tree. And how would you do this? Well, one way is to consider the differences and similarities between these 3 taxa. And so as we look at these sequences, we can see, for example, the taxon B and C have a similarity at position 2 here that is not shared by taxon A. So that's one way in which these are more similar to each other. Here's another location at which there are differences between the 3 taxa. In this particular case, A and C share a characteristic not shared by B. And then here's another example where B and C share a characteristic not shared by shared by A, having a U here instead of a C. So when we compare all these similarities and differences, hopefully you understand that you can tally these up. If we say, well, how many differences do we see between B and C? If we compare these two, there's only one difference between these 2 taxa, and that is at this particular location here, position 5 in this 8 nucleotide sequence. If we compare A and C, meaning taxon A with taxon C, you can see that there's 2 differences, right? This one here and this one here. If we compare A and B, we can see there's 3 differences, right? This one, and this one. So in mulling over the pattern of differences between these 3 taxa, it should make sense to you that B and C, taxa, T-A-X-A is plural of taxon, taxa B and C are more similar to each other on the basis of these shared characteristics than either one is to A. And therefore, a more logical, the most logical way of representing this on a phylogenetic tree is to show B and C as sister taxa, which are more closely related to each other than either one is to A. They are more similar to each other. By the way, one last point about phylogenetic trees is that there is absolutely no information at all in terms of the linear sequence of names here. The information of a phylogenetic tree is exactly the same if you rotate around any node. So for example, if we take this node right here and rotate around that node, we would end up with this phylogenetic tree. These 2 phylogenetic trees are exactly identical in the information that is in this phylogenetic tree. Either one of these trees states that B and C are sister taxa. They are more closely related to each other than either one is to taxon A. They're exactly the same. So there is no significance whatsoever in terms of the representation here. We could also put A up on top and have B and C on the bottom and just rotate the entire tree.